What happens when someone fades into the background of their own life? Your friends, your family, your neighbors, nobody realizes that you've just disappeared, leaving a world of unanswered questions and unfulfilled dreams. Joyce Vincent was found dead in her flat for over 3 years, surrounded by Christmas presents. This all happened in December of 2003. How comes nobody noticed that she was MIA, and why didn't anyone check on her? This is the tragic story of Joyce Vincent. Today's case, I find it very tragic, very sad, because it really made me think how close people are as a community. But in Joyce's story, it's just about isolation, loneliness, and what we all fear. I could speak for everyone when I mention dying alone is something that we don't want to happen. And that's exactly what happened to Joyce. And there are so much unanswered questions regarding her death. And I'm thinking, just like Linda Bishop, did she die with a broken heart? Because today's story is gonna raise more questions than answers. So Joyce was born in Hammersmith in London on October 19th, 1965 to her parents Lawrence and Lyris. Lyris, her mom, was a stay-at-home mom. They were fairly close, but with her dad, she didn't have a relationship with him. This is because her dad was a terrible parent, to be honest. He was working as a carpenter. However, he had a wandering eye. He was just, a ladies' man, despite being a father and a husband. He just prioritized chasing women instead of, respecting his family. And as Joyce grew older, she grew a lot of resentment against him, to the point she told everybody that he has died. What she meant was he's dead to her. However, he's very much alive. It is fair to say that Joyce has cut him off completely. And when Joyce was 11 years old, her mother tragically passed. The reasons for her mother passing is not known. I couldn't find exactly the cause of death, but her mom did pass away. However, Joyce does have 4 older sisters, and they practically raised her. There isn't much information regarding Joyce's childhood. However, while she was at school, she attended the Melcombe Primary School, and she also attended a girls' school in Fulham. But at the age of 16, she left without any formal qualifications. So by the age of 24, Joyce had made many friends in the music industry, and she attended a concert in London where she met Nelson Mandela in 1990. He was, doing a public speaking at the time, and she just managed to go backstage and give him a good handshake. She met Mandela, which is amazing. Joyce did very well for herself. She was working a corporate job in London for Ernst & Young, and she was a secretary. She was making good money, and she was so independent. She was well-spoken, well-dressed, and she knew how to take care of herself despite losing her parents at such a young age. Joyce was very hardworking, and in her corporate job, she was known to be very social and outlandish. She was well-spoken, well-dressed, and she would get positive attention from men. Most people at the workplace would look up to her, and many people described her as a breath of fresh air, and nobody had anything bad to say about her. This is where things get a bit strange. In March of 2001, Joyce just quits her job out of the blue. She didn't give a reason. She just completely quits her job. And then she ends up staying at a domestic abuse shelter in Haringey, which is located in north of London. Now, Joyce is unemployed. However, she does need money to survive, so she decides to work as a cleaner. And I'm thinking, from a corporate job to a essential worker. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being a cleaner, but that is just a huge jump from what she was doing earlier, you know? So now that Joyce is in a domestic abuse shelter, which is practically a safe house, okay, for victims that have experienced partners that were abusing them and so on. There could be families there. It's just like a small unit that she lives in. So Joyce lives in a flat above a shopping center located in Wood Green. And there were just a few women there with their families and children, and they were just keeping themselves to themselves because they were all victims of violence. So it is completely normal for people to be quite wary and keep a distance, you know. I strongly believe that nobody knew that Joyce was in a relationship, nor did she tell anyone that she moved home, because nobody visited Joyce. Nobody knew what has happened to her. She was a very private person. That's the kind of vibe I got from researching today's case. She didn't tell anybody anything. Was she ashamed? Was she embarrassed? Because sometimes getting abused by a partner, by someone that you love, you're waiting for that person to be as sweet and nice as they were at the beginning, if that makes sense. And you're just thinking of yourself like, I'm a strong woman, I can handle it. But it's also, according to the National Domestic Abuse website, it is incredibly dangerous to get out and ask for help, because once the perpetrator finds out what you're up to, this is where women get killed. Or anybody. It could be a man, woman, anybody. Things get very dangerous, you know? So you have to proceed with caution. So Joyce was in a relationship that nobody knew about. By nobody, I mean her friends, her colleagues. She didn't tell anybody she was dating someone. I think things got really ugly quickly, maybe. I'm not sure. So obviously things didn't work out, and that's how she ended up in the shelter. But I just think, this is my own personal opinion, okay? I just think that things got really ugly. Her boyfriend probably put his hands on her and she just ran for her life. And they just decided to put her in a home. So there's more steps to that. However, because she's in the house, her whole life turned 360. From working a corporate job in London to being in the most deprived areas in London, living above a shopping city where you're literally in a safe house. I don't think anyone would be keen to, explain their situation to their loved ones, Maybe Joyce was a very prideful woman. Who knows? I have another theory. I think once you get, abused by someone you love, it causes betrayal trauma. And when that happens to someone, when they experience domestic violence, I think that your whole personality changes. You lose that spark that you had, You might feel very closed off. You won't dress the way you used to. You probably be more withdrawn. You probably be a bit more scared, but your friends and family will notice that, oh, you've changed, I knew someone, this woman was beautiful. She would wear hair, makeup. You could smell her from a mile away. And unfortunately, she fell into a domestic abusive relationship. And when I saw her again, she wasn't wearing any makeup. She looked like all of the energy was drawn from her body. And in her eyes, you can see nothing but sadness, heartbreak, devastation. And it's just so sad because a lot of people that get abused are not aware of what's happening to them, because abuse is a whole spectrum. I could make a whole video on that on itself. So if you're a victim of abuse, things that brought you joy and happiness won't feel the same anymore. You'll feel a bit more withdrawn. You're going to keep yourself to yourself. You will slowly disappear. You're doing this out of your own sake and safety and to preserve whatever energy you have left. So back to Joyce. She was living in a safe house in North London, and you probably thought, okay, she must have told at least someone, at least one person, but she didn't. her next of kin was her bank manager. She didn't put down any of her 4 sisters or a former partner, a best friend. I don't think she was a best friend. I have a close group network kind of person, if that makes sense. Maybe she was quite introverted, and I think that's normal when people get older. Maintaining adult friendships can be hard based on, busy lifestyles and so on. With Joyce, I've noticed that even though she wasn't educated formally, she was quite well spoken, and she made sure that, she was very hardworking because she had a wonderful career, but she threw it all away. Or was she forced out of that situation? Did someone come into her life and ruin it? I think it's her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, that did this, because once you're in a relationship, it's a lot of work. Trust me, I know. But some people, they get distracted, Did she get distracted? Did she get love bombed? Did he persuade her to quit her job? Or did she do it out of necessity? I'm not sure. But she does seem to be the type of person that wanted to share her life with someone. She did seem like she wanted to have a long-term partner, children, a big home, white picket fence kind of life, I completely forgot to mention her former partner. His name was Martin, and they dated for a while. However, over time, things started to fizzle out. And she was speaking to Martin less and less. Martin was a nice guy, and he truly did love her. But at the same time, when it comes to relationships, it's kind of complicated, especially at the beginning, So they were dating, but not exclusively together, if that makes sense. But with Joyce, she was here one minute and she disappeared the next. There was one occasion where she was walking through London, and one of her work colleagues were calling out to her, like, "Oh my God, hi Joyce." And she saw them and she scurried right past her and didn't say a word. And then her colleague was like, "Oh, okay, that's your choice." So everybody at the workplace found Martin and Joyce to be this wonderful couple. They were cute. A lot of people were teasing Martin for, how did you end up being with Joyce? Because he wasn't a looker, and I quote, they were just making fun of him like, "Oh, she's so attractive and you're average looking, so how did you manage to get a girl like Joyce?" However, things were beginning to get a bit sour because Joyce started partying a bit more, and she was speaking to Martin less and less, and this is how they drifted apart, Because Martin thought, okay, she's out there partying, she's out late, she is just missing in action. So he just assumed that whatever they had, that spark just fizzled out and it's over between them, which is sad, He truly was waiting for her to come back, It's one of those situations where you're giving the person time and space and hoping for them to come back. I don't know if this is a blush or a highlighter. I guess we'll find out. When Martin found out about Joyce's death, he said, and I quote, "I wish she wronged me because I truly did love her. I wish she would have said something." So in November of 2003, Joyce was hospitalized and she was diagnosed with a peptic ulcer, which is a break in the lining of her large intestine. It is very painful. However, she didn't tell a soul that she was sick. Some experts believe that she died because of this peptic ulcer. However, it was classed as a natural cause. Joyce was also suffering from asthma, and she didn't really keep on top of it throughout her early years. So fast forward to January of 2006, 3 years later, this is where bailiffs found her body, and it was almost skeletal, and I quote, "Joyce was laying on her back next to a bunch of unwrapped Christmas presents. We don't know who she was gonna give these presents to because she did cut herself off from everybody she knew. I'm not even sure whether or not her sisters tried to make contact or even call the police. No, I don't think they actually called the police. They just assumed that Joyce wanted to be left alone and they just let her live her life, When the bailiffs came, this is due to the fact that she didn't pay her rent and she accumulated around £2,400 in arrears. But half of her rent was getting paid through the benefit system. Because she was a victim of domestic abuse, she was getting some support from the government. So because of that, they didn't really think anything of it, Half of her bills were getting paid. Her electric, her gas, everything else was getting paid through direct debit, monthly occurring payments and so on. But once the bailiff set foot into the property, they were greeted by a terrible smell, and her bedsit flat obviously was covered in cobwebs, dust. Her body was there decomposing, and it was just so gloomy and dull. And the definition of dying alone is so scary. It really is. There was literally no life in the property, and the neighbors didn't interact with one another. It was a community of people just keeping to themselves. Many people believe that the flat was empty and it was unoccupied, and the smell was coming from nearby bins on the floor below them. Because, like I said, the bedsit flat was above a shopping city, and as she was laying dead in her apartment, there were people just beneath her buying Christmas presents for their loved ones, and I just find that so eerie. I forgot to mention that once these bailiffs made their way into the apartment, the TV was cranked up to the highest level. It was so loud. People did complain. However, not much was done about it, Nobody really knows how she died, because once they found her body, she was, just a skeleton. So it was too late to perform a full autopsy. Joyce was identified through dental records, and she was only 38 years old. She was so young. The police ruled her death as natural causes, and there was no foul play involved. And this is where I kind of don't agree fully, because I don't think she was attacked in her flat, because, the doors was bolted shut and there was no sign of forced entry. But I believe whoever isolated her was responsible for her death. I think her ex-boyfriend drove her insane and made her just live on her own. Maybe she thought living in solitude could be the answers to her suffering. I don't know. Investigators do believe that she intentionally cut ties with her friends and family, and that was a personal choice. It's not illegal to do that, but it's kind of sad, I have so many questions. I mean, this case is tragic to say the least, but at the same time, it got me thinking, when people die alone, it's usually from a broken heart, It's due to loneliness, isolation, and there are many reasons why they end up in this position. Was Joyce in good terms with her family? Because nobody realized she was missing for almost 3 years. Has anybody tried to contact her? I mean, I do understand adult relationships can tend to fizzle out. People are preoccupied with their jobs, their families, and so on. But how can you not realize a whole person just went off the grid without, investigating? Are you okay? Did they even try and reach out to her when it was her birthday or any kind of special occasion? What's so unsettling about this case is that Joyce died alone. She probably died from an asthma attack or the peptic ulcer, and she died whilst her body was laying in that flat, whilst so many people downstairs were shopping for their Christmas presents, not knowing a decomposing body is just right above their heads. So anyways, guys, this brings us to the end of today's case. Please do stay safe and hydrated, and I'll see you guys again next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.